Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Modern Market. It's our daily show from Monday to Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 12 p.m. BST, GMT, every day of the week, where we discuss all things to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make money by leveraging the internet and the latest technologies. I'm your host, B-Check, your resident DJ that sometimes doesn't want to play the music. I'm joined by my legendary co-host, Legendary, who tells me that I'm not playing the music by violently gesticulating with his arms in the video. And then I genuinely didn't know what was going on today, but that's okay. We figured it out in the end. We are delighted to say we have Jack on stage with us, got some good takes waiting for us, I am sure. But before we get to the crux of the show today, just a reminder that nothing that we say here is financial advice. We talk a lot about prices. We talk a lot about them going up, a lot about them going down. We don't know which way they're going to go, though. So please navigate the modern market with caution. Please exercise your own judgment. You already know that. With that out of the way, Legendary, how are you doing this Tuesday, the 14th of November?
GM, doing just fine. For everyone who doesn't know, before we are going live on StreamYard, streaming the show on YouTube, obviously B and I are already on camera. We have a couple of things we kind of have our visual cues for before the show. One of which is when I'm hosting, and B-Check is obviously hosting on his own account, but also hosting the Modern Market account. He's violently waving at me with the Modern Market phone. So I remember to add it as a co-host. And I was typing in our private chat that we also use to communicate throughout the show that there is no music playing. And then I started to trying to point at the chat, so pointing to my right. But then I also remember that my video is mirrored, so I pointed to my left. And apparently I got B-Check so confused pointing to my left and right that he just didn't see it. He left his chair, came back a minute later. I was still waving and pointing to get his attention, but then the unmuting actually worked better than me trying to gesticulate. I think it will take more time for us to read those visual cues better.
No. I think it's fine. I think it's fine the way it is. I've actually suggested this to you before. I don't like communicating with text during the show. I would rather you just do motions.
Yeah, but when you do motions, sometimes I don't understand them, and then I start to feel stressed because you want me to do something. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm
But
genuinely freaking out on the inside.
that's exactly how I felt just now. But I still prefer that. I still prefer having to type. Then people will say, "Oh, we can hear you typing." Blah 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 blah. Like, what are we supposed to do? We just do the motions, especially pre-show when they can't see. I mean, I appreciate now we're live on YouTube at the same time. That's a little bit more weird. But even still, why not? Just why not? Doesn't really matter, does it?
That's true. Something they can see though is the announcement that you had yesterday. You announced your partnership with Gandhi XYZ. You've obviously spent quite some time exploring NFT lending and did a lot of experimenting with that, something we talked about on the show quite often. And yesterday you announced joining Gandhi XYZ as which is an NFT lending platform, as an ambassador. Well, first of all, congrats on that. Well deserved. Tell me more about the ambassadorship deal, how that came to be, and I think you also recently extended your Little Nouns partnership. So you've been crushing it on the partnership side of things.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks. One of the reasons why I've been working so hard, I think in the last month and even going into November, is because I really, really wanted to get some of these deals over the line. I know lots of people in the audience, we're working quite creatively. We're working at least in part in a freelance role. And so, I mean, not only are you always looking for new opportunities, but one of the things I've been fortunate enough to come round to now is that, it was the times come round where it was time to renegotiate or reaffirm my previous opportunities. So I think that's also a really important time. People often are tempted by like the shiny new thing or the shiny new partner that they could potentially work with, not thinking that you are already, if you are lucky, working with some really good people. So the thing that I had really prioritized pre-Christmas or pre-December was to get some of these existing deals like redone, basically. So for another period of time. And so I've signed with Gondi for a few months, and I've re-signed with Lil Nouns for 6 months, which is amazing. They sponsor the newsletter. Gondi will be a little bit more of a cross-media sponsorship. So it's obviously of the snapshot each day. There'll be something cool in there where integrated into the NFT high sales section, there will be like a cool loan that's taken place, or one of the cool features that they've used and that they enable. So for example, today's one is this CryptoPunk that Seed Phrase owns, and he's also an advisor to Gondi. And he managed to renegotiate his loan from a 40 ETH loan for this CryptoPunk up to a 48 ETH loan, and with just an interest increasing by 1%. So there'll be little features like that to show you what is possible with NFT lending. And as you said, I've been experimenting with it. I can't remember for how long now, but there was a point in time a while ago where I decided I need some capital to just play around. So I converted about 50 ETH worth of USDC, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go on Blend. I'm going to feel what perpetual lending feels like. And the reason why I'm doing that is not for fun, not even really for money, because like, yes, you can earn some interest, but because I genuinely think NFT lending is one of the components of the future of finance. Like it's going to be huge for the future of finance. We're going to see all kinds of things tokenized, right? So yes, at the moment it might be purely digital assets, but moving forward, we can see all types of things which are tokenized, and all of those things can access global liquidity via NFT lending. So that's why I'm super excited about it. That's why I wanted to get that partnership over the line, and I'm super happy to do that. And there will actually be, a component of that sponsorship will be on the modern market. So it's not just a personal sponsorship, it's also of the show. So yeah, we'll be able to bring you some cool stuff that they're doing periodically. So I'm really excited about that. How are you feeling about it? That we're going to have I know it is our first sponsorship. So pretty happy with that.
Obviously, I'm very, very excited about that as well. And there's two things that did stand out for me from what you just said, from a creator's perspective. So first of all, it is the notion of, you said you extended Little Noun style for 6 months. You signed Gondi for a couple of months to focus on those longer partnerships, to just don't waste your time to negotiate a deal for a one-off activation, one-off thread. It's just not worth it. When at the same time you can think about those longer partnerships. And the second point that you mentioned is actually, to me, a requirement for the first point, to put yourself in a position to be able to strike those long-term deals, is that you need to participate in this space. Like, you can't be talking about how relevant NFT lending is all day and report on different protocols without never using them. You actually have to put your own capital at risk. You have to play around with them. You have to experiment, because then you will see the differences. Then you have a way deeper understanding, whether that's for a potential role as an advisor or an ambassador. If you're not basically walking the talk and you're just the one sharing the news about something, but you never use those protocols and never participate, it will get so much more difficult to put yourself in a position where you can actually be considered to either become an ambassador or an advisor for those projects.
Yeah, one of the things I was reflecting on yesterday to try to make it make sense or bring value to other people is that what was I going to say? That's not valuable. It's not valuable to other people to say you're about to bring them value and then forget what you're going to say. Legendary. I've forgotten. What were you? You said there was another thing that stood out for you, or you were going to say something about how Gondi's the modern market's first sponsor. Are you pleased with that?
Yeah, no, I'm super happy with that. I think on the value side of things, that is how I also address partnerships. That it's not in a partnership that I want to sell something to my audience. It's like, not, yo, this mint is coming up, you have to mint this because numbers will go up. But thinking about how you positioned yourself with the daily snapshot, you're sharing news, you're sharing things that are relevant to this space, you're sharing market data, and then you add another segment to it, which you believe that is relevant before you had the sponsorship, right? You did participate in NFT lending. You just said you have conviction in it. There's interesting data points. And the way you then add value is that goes both ways by having a sponsor who actually does that. And then you can pick interesting loans, interesting developments that are going on, and add them to the other market data that you're sharing, which is never the intention to sell something to your audience. It's not a product it's not a mint that you promote, but it's something that like quite organically extends the snapshot that you've already been doing for months and months.
Yeah, it fits in nicely. I remember the thing that I was going to say. Because on reflection, and I think this will help a lot of people, because if you're looking for these types of deals or considering how to position yourself, I mean, on reflection, I'm not, the biggest account as such, right? But I think I've managed to punch above my weight in terms of my follower account, because I focus on either a particular type of audience or things which I genuinely am really passionate about. And you can probably differentiate yourself that way. And say, for example, you're really into gaming and you're not necessarily a big account, people want, like, those gaming protocols will and projects will want to find people who are super passionate either about the system in general, but even on a more niche level. If you have 100 to 150 to 200 people who are super interested in that specific game following you because you're creating quality content about that specific game, then you're suddenly, you could potentially jump the line in front of a bunch of other people with a much higher follower account, because you're creating far more relevant content and it's far more relevant engagement. And I think sometimes people feel a little bit disheartened, or they might think that they don't have enough of a following, or they don't have enough of a, I don't know, general standing in the space to execute on some of these deals, when that's not been my experience. So I think you can, if you position yourself appropriately, take advantage of, well, you can take advantage of the position that you put yourself in. So you have to think about what position you are putting yourself in.
100% agree with that. And adding to that, I feel like that those partnerships, and not want to talk like about Gondi specifically, but protocols, layer 2 solutions, lending protocols, liquid staking solutions that just seem quote unquote boring at first sight,
Mm,
because it's not the most hyped game in the space. It's not like Camel partnering up, working with Sugartown with the Zynga game, and just pushing their content hard and having basically the trending kid on the block, the hyped up game that you're representing, but like more of the infrastructure protocols that are super relevant, but just don't get that sense of excitement, right? If you know what I'm saying with that.
yeah.
Um, I feel like it's partnerships that often are so organic and would make sense with so many creators, but many people don't really seem to think about them because they rather want to go for, Animoca, because biggest, not only gaming but like portfolio company in the space right now with 450 plus holdings, the most trending games, whether that's Shrapnel sponsoring a bunch of shows, which is all good. It's not me criticizing that, but these are like the obvious things that many people think about. And there's also good reason for that to some extent, because by associating yourself with a brand like Animoca, like Sammy, who's in the audience right now, did as an ambassador, that also helps you to elevate yourself as a creator, because it puts you in the same echelon with other creators who have that role, with people like Whale, for example. But it's also the positions that so many people want to go for, and that leaves so many other partnerships on the table. And what it also does, you're not necessarily restricted to have one partnership. And if you think about those different verticals, think about how you have the partnership, for example, with, again, Gondi and Little Noun Style. They are not competing with one another. They're like two completely different entities and things
Yeah.
having different goals in the space, and you can arrange them still very, very nicely. You have Gondi more on the snapshot, you have Little Noun Style on your newsletter, because you also created multiple content verticals. So if you approach that strategically and like kind of broaden that horizon of how you can partner up and what content avenues you build as a creator, it just allows you to build a stronger partnership portfolio at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. And Chimpers, to add to that list, right?
Oh yeah,
Who,
sorry, I forgot them.
it's fine, it's fine. But to your point, I'll tell people my vision for this for free. Then we're going to get into the news. Jack, I want to hear from you in a second as well. Then we also want to get into the rest of the show. But I'll tell people what my vision was like 6-7 months ago, a year ago, before I had any partnerships. And this is based on what I saw other creators able to do. I think that content creation, and sometimes I think of myself as a content creator, sometimes I don't, and kind of cringe at the term. But in any event, it's very sport like. It's very sport like the method, the process, the dedication, the reps that you got to put in. And on some level, when I see my favorite football team, Manchester United, play, and when you see those players get interviewed, behind them, there's always that screen, right? The screen of sponsors. And they'll have like a tire sponsor, an airplane sponsor, a food sponsor, I don't know. Basically, they've got every single type of sponsorship under the sun. And I think, okay, fine. At the beginning, you need to limit yourself to your specific niche and get, those few under the belt. But long term, there's no reason why many of us in here shouldn't be able to uh, position ourselves in a way that we have a layer two sponsor, we have a NFT lending sponsor, we have a kind of NFT project sponsor, we have you position yourself appropriately so that each of these different niches are interested in you in some way. And then what you can offer as an addition on top of that is the fact that you can connect these communities together. One of the interesting things after my Gondi announcement yesterday is one of the other projects that I'm an advisor on, they messaged to say something related to Gondi, like, oh, cool, like maybe we could work together in some capacity and like trying to figure something out. So it's like once you then have a bunch of different verticals, you can actually bring those people together in a really interesting way. So uh, that's my final thought on that, and that is my broad vision for everything really. The snapshot, modern market. I think that's the way to think about it if you want to be uh, ambitious over a long period of time. Jack, a lot of information there. What's your thought before we head into the news?
Yeah, just a quick one. I think there's actually a book on this called Key Person of Influence, and it's this idea that once you build your brand broadly enough and big enough, then the impact that can have, we are now seeing like just huge repercussions for. So if you look at like The Rock or Ryan Reynolds, where they literally just go buy a whiskey brand and then all of a sudden it's worth like 10 times as much because of their reach. If you look at Mr. Beast and him now realizing that he is so big that there's no point in trying to find other brands, but he's got to create his own brands because that's the only way he gets a return on the amount of views that he brings in. I think it definitely makes a lot of sense to me, not just as like from a potential content creator's perspective, but also as like a project's perspective. I do think one of the biggest unsaid things in the market right now is this idea that as a project, you don't need to, in some way, curate your content and actually create in the same vein as these key people of influence do, as these creators do, if you want to leverage the audience that currently is in NFTs. And there's a really great example below us with Sammy, and we've seen it with Whale as well. We see that there are projects who realize the power of these key people of influence in the space. And what they do is they bring them on as advisors and ambassadors if they don't have that within their own team. But I do think it's like becoming more and more clear that unless you've got big pockets and deep pockets that can literally leverage somebody's brand and, you know, the sort of reputation that they've developed, i.e. Whale and Sammy, then you've got to do this yourself as a founder or at least a member of the project team. And that's something I'm keeping a very close eye on when I do look at projects that I'm looking to sort of pick up.
Yeah, makes sense, man. Like it's kind of scary on one level, but also so empowering on another level. It's like to know that you have that much possibility and potential is amazing. Like to know that if you just work and grind and are able to increase your reach, then you have all of this potential. But then, the responsibility to get that done and get yourself over the line and get there is really, really hard. Like it's, when you're going from 0 to 100 or 100 to 1,000 or 1,000 to 2,000, like each one is, the earlier you are, the harder it is. But man, the upside from the internet is just extraordinary. Like I cannot, I had never realized it until I got into the space. And once I clocked on, I was like, okay, it's time. Got to figure this stuff out, because I'd actually never been on social media before, basically, before before NFT Twitter. So definitely got to figure that stuff out. Hope that was a bit of a helpful, just thought process on sponsorships, deal making, partnerships, how to get things over the line, how I think about things, how Legendary thinks about things, how Jack thinks about things. But we do have a show to get into. We've got some really good news as we get into it. But as a reminder, friends, please help us out. Click the comment button in the right-hand corner so we can get some more people in here. And as always, if you want to follow along, the snapshot is up top. Please do like it if you find it brings you some value today. So let's get into it, starting with the crypto prices. Maybe we've got Bitcoin at 36.5, ETH at 2K, Solana at 54.2, down 8%, Ape at 1.5. So Solana, the big mover down out of the majors, the rest just steadying. NFT volume is down a touch at 16.8 million, Blur's at 11.4, OpenSea at 3.7. The headlines is that meme rips up 60% to all-time highs. That's at a $2.3 billion FDV. People seem to be very taken aback by that move yesterday. Did not see that coming. Going to get into those details and how it's affected captains in a moment. Number 2, Solana's premier NFT collection, Mad Lads, hits an all-time high 84 Sol floor. Way more than an NFT project, I'm learning. Going to touch on that a little bit. Maybe going to have to touch more on Solana as we move forward as well. And finally, venture capital firm Foresight Ventures has purchased 80% stake in crypto media company The Block. Very big implications, I think, there for media. I definitely have some thoughts on that too. Want to get into that in a moment. Getting into the floor prices and the notable sales, we have CryptoPunks at 58.7 ETH, down a couple of percent. Bored Apes down 3% at 30.3. Mutants at 5.7. DGods at 3.3. Captains up 6%, probably on the meme rise as well at 4.4 ETH. Azuki's down a few at 6 ETH. Penguins at 5.2. Moonbirds at 2.1. And Nouns at 24 ETH. We have a Tyler Hobbs Fidenza selling for 79 ETH, which is $162,000, and a CryptoPunk Top Hat selling for 83 ETH. That's $170,000. Legendary, that is the price action. Those are the headlines. What numbers are you liking there?
Definitely like to see Fidenzas moving again. It's not the only Fidenza that moved over the last 2 weeks. And I remember that one period in our show, which was a couple months ago, when we had Fidenzas almost every day, then almost no Fidenza sales, and now they are coming back to life. So that's definitely cool to observe. And other than that, it's also the news around meme and captains, which we will get to in a second, I assume.
Yeah, let's do it. I think you're right. I think that's probably the main numerical analysis that probably needs to be done today. Figure out what's going on in that ecosystem. So let's get into it. You want to do it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you mentioned, meme is up or was up 60% over the past 24 hours. Right now, meme is at 3.3 cents. So over the last 24 hours now, that's a 30% increase. The captains are up, but way less than that, which is very interesting to observe because it connects to the discussion that we previously had on the show. We talked about the intrinsic value of the captains now that they have this meme token locked in it, which will unlock in the long run in a nonlinear fashion. The question then kind of became, how do you value the meme package within the captain? How do you value the captain basically itself? And how do you discount for the fact that you have those unlocks in the future? And you've also seen what ape unlocks did to the ape price, for example. And the way the market values it right now is, if you, for example, look at a human captain, it's sitting in a 4.4 ETH floor, has almost 12 ETH locked into it. If you look at the rarest of captains, which is the alien, then you're looking at like a 39 ETH or sales around the 39 ETH range, with almost 120 ETH locked into that. So you see basically a 2.5 to 3x multiple on the amount of meme that is locked in the captain, and thus also very steep discount on the market's assumption on the future meme price. It's also a post that NFT Stats shared that we currently are putting up on YouTube right now. And very interesting in that was actually a comment by Sammy, who came up with what I found to be a both degen and hilarious idea, which was, sounds like degens might take out a loan against the captain at the highest loan to value available, then use the proceeds to open up a short position on meme, then default on the loan if the NFT price tanks, which is quite a hilarious idea. But it definitely opens up that last point that I want to make. Basically, the thought process that I remember that Loki also pointed out at one point, that it is not a good idea from Loki's perspective to sell your meme to just buy captains, because by selling your meme, you also put more price pressure on the captains, which also are partially valued because of what we just said, the meme package that is within them. So that balance between the NFT and the ERC20 token is a very delicate one to maintain. And you could come up with the idea as a holder to make moves that you would see like as favorable and helpful for the ecosystem, like, hey, let's sell some meme and sweep some captains, which ultimately could put more negative pressure on the ecosystem or on the prices that you wouldn't have necessarily expected at the first moment.
Yeah, interesting analysis. I guess it might sound more complicated than it is. I think if I were to try to simplify it down, it would be something like there's a whole load of ETH in the form of meme locked up in the captains, but the market does not seem to want to value it at its present value, as it assumes that the value of the meme is going to go down over time. Do you want to come back on that, and then we're going to go to Jack?
I would push back on it. Like, the simplification is very correct, but I wouldn't say that the market doesn't seem to value that meme coin that highly, because it's like only a 60-ish discount on the price. And if you see where like Ape went from airdrop after all the unlocks, and where it's now like 90 or 95% down from its all-time high, and you see the discount on meme that you get within a captain, it's not that high actually. So the market, by pricing captains at 4.4 ETH and not say at like 2 ETH, because they will assume, or 1 ETH, that all the meme inside is basically worthless, it takes a very bullish position actually on the meme unlock that you get. It's not that steep of a discount.
I don't know. Because I've said this before about captains. Like, say there is 11 ETH of ETH inside a captain. Say you discount it by 50 to 70%, and there's only 5 or 3. I don't think a meme land captain is worth 1 ETH. I don't, because again, when you go back to that comparative analysis of NFTs, there's just so many other NFTs that are worth more with no package. And I think this is what happens as soon as you introduce an ERC20 into an ecosystem. People overly financialize the NFT and only think about it as this vehicle which is loaded with that ERC20. But there's a bunch of NFTs out right now that have no ERC20, and there will be no ERC20. Or there has been already an ERC20, and that's like out of the system now. And then they're still trading for like 2, 3, 4, because NFTs can do that. So I think that's another factor to think of. Legendary thoughts, and then we're going to Jack.
Yeah, the intrinsic value, I definitely agree with that, becomes so difficult. No matter how much you discount meme in your mental model, becomes so difficult to evaluate. And I hear you there saying that, other NFTs in that similar league don't have a token or have had a token, and they still have the price floor. But on the other hand, the captains went token first. It is ultimately, after the reveal, the first deliverable that they are showing, and packing that huge meme unlock in within the NFT kind of makes it that financial meme unlock vehicle that not people in the community who are excited for the things to come and they are more thinking about the long-term roadmap, but like from someone who would be an external observer to that and seeing, okay, this project delivered a token, they will build an ecosystem. If I'm bullish on that and I want to get tokens at a discount, then the thing that I can do is to buy the NFT. I do think that it almost becomes reduced, not again for community members, but like for outsiders who would want to get into that trade, to a meme carrying vehicle in a sense.
Yeah, for traders, I think people will focus on that. I think my point is that we will overly focus on that, and maybe suppress the other price a little bit too much. That's my thinking anyway. Jack, what's your thought on this? I think I might know what it is, and I'm actually going to have something to push back. I'm ready. I'm ready for what you got to say. I'm going to push back. So go for it.
Well, actually, I perceive that you would have pushback, so
Good.
I've pushed back to your pushback. So
Good.
let's go.
Let's
No,
go.
I'm joking. Look, I actually like we're having time to think on this since your post. I keep blanking on X. Like, what do you call it now? It's not a tweet; it's a post. Sorry about that. Anyway, I think one thing is that history has told this story plenty of times. Legendary just pointed out the fact that ApeCoin, this is different. ApeCoin was a single drop, like an immediate drop, but you do also have the likes of Cyberkongs and Creeps that did a daily sort of yield. Again, different than that. It's vested, and we don't have a time frame on it. I think realistically, it's a bull indicator for the NFT, because I do think the price is a reasonable one at the current level of the project, of the current level of meme and the cost of meme. Because to me, Ray isn't Ray is the CEO, by the way, but Ray isn't going to unvest because he hasn't given himself a time frame or a date on this without there being significant demand for the token. We do seem to be going into what basically no other project has gone into to the same extent. Maybe Creeps with Loom, which is like a bull market around those coins specifically on these larger exchanges as well. So that really can't be underestimated, the fact that this is on like big exchanges. And I think that idea that realistically, what I think is it's bullish for not the NFT price, but for the long-term holder. And I think that's always been Ray's like main objective, is the people who hold are going to be the ones who get the like majority of the rewards, not the flippers. And I think that's where we're at with this token. I think that it is a good bet. I do think that if you look at the ape model, there's still potentially more drops. They did do potatoes, so they're not completely new. But I don't know enough about the ecosystem. Potatoes to me seem like a kennel club, but maybe I'm wrong there. I know they do have yield and stuff, so there's a bit of a difference. But that's sort of where I'm coming out from this. Is there's history that tells us no, but the way they're doing this is very different, and I think maybe actually bullish.
I actually wouldn't disagree. I saw that I told you about the pushback. You anticipate the pushback, and then it turns out that the pushback was actually a feint. It was a faux pushback. It was just to throw you off to start. No, the thing that I was going to say is that I know that we now know in hindsight that post a particular point in time with ApeCoin and all of the unlocks, the price has ultimately got wrecked over a period of time, right? Like we know that to be true. However, we're not there. Well, I'm not going to say we are where we actually are, because I ultimately don't know. But I'm looking at the chart right now, and it came out in, I can't remember, maybe April or May 22, March 22, maybe. And it was only from the highs in May 22, at the end of May, sorry. So that's a couple of months that's when we started to see this gradual decline. Well, very, very steep at a particular time, and then gradual, just kind of grinding lower over time. So between March and maybe the end of April, something like that. I mean, ApeCoin basically went on the wildest, craziest run possible. And I think from memory, that was because of the other side mint, which people said, well, they just said that was the first time that you will need Ape for this. I think, Legendary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was why the mint was, that's why ApeCoin went completely crazy, because it was the only way you could get it from my memory. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that yes, we could be in a time frame where the price goes down and declines with emissions as always, but there is also the case where sometimes for a period of time, particularly when a project is new, and I think ApeCoin is also a case study of that, that you could have this really bullish sentiment around that first real utility. So again, I don't know which way it's going to go. I just think ApeCoin can both be an example of how a coin will decline over a long period of time with unlocks, and simultaneously be an example for how that first utility that you create, when you create that first hype drop or whatever sync that you're going to create for the coin, it's also an example of the price rapidly appreciating in a way that basically makes no sense. I mean, ApeCoin hit $24 or something like that at one point in time. So just wanted to bear that in mind. Legendary, what are your
memory
thoughts on
serves
that?
you correctly, it was end of April. Ape was at $24, as you said. Even crazier than that was the 24-hour trading volume back then. It was $5.6 billion. Also, one point before we go back to Jack that I wanted to point out from the comments is on X by Confusion, with a very cool idea. You can potentially use flooring protocol to hedge captain's risk and still claim the next airdrop. Very similar to the play that we talked about after the first airdrop, how Spencer pointed out that people basically safe box their captains to take the 2 ETH arbitrage. And that just goes back to the very, very beginning of the show where we said, if you want to do something in this space, you have to participate and experiment with those protocols, because otherwise you won't even figure out that there are opportunities like this that you could potentially seize. Just a small tangent here, but I wanted to point out that comment by Confusion.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting addition there. I think that's worth bearing in mind. Jack, final thought on this before we move on.
Yeah, I think just on the price action on ApeCoin, it was specifically due to the fact that if you got mint for the land, you could only mint it with ApeCoin. So there was specific pressure. People thought that thing was going to get hot out of the gate. I think we haven't mentioned the SEC. I can't remember the timeframes on that, but I feel like that was additional downwards pressure that we know it seems unlikely that meme land will face as well. And then I just wanted to point out the fact that only just now am I dawning on the whole idea of the project is meme land, and they haven't dropped land yet. Am I wrong about that? Because I feel like that's potentially, like, if they just follow the same narrative, but obviously in a completely different country region that doesn't have the SEC downwards pressure that they have. Who is to say that that won't work entirely, because people can do those calculations and they have historic evidence of how effective that would be. So yeah, just wanted to point that out.
Do you know what? I was on the website the other day because I said on the show the other day I bought one at 3.7. I'm pretty sure there is land coming, because something. Look, here I am. I'm on the website now. I'm just going to put it on the screen for the people on YouTube. You've got meme land, our collections. You've got the real MPP. You've got the potatoes. You've got the captains, and then TBC, Treasure Islands, not the classic novel by Robert Louis Stevenson. You can't click on it. There's no information. You've obviously got meme coin as well. But yeah, TBC, Treasure Islands. I don't know what that means. But when you just said that, it did make me remember that. So who knows? Maybe that will play some component moving forward. But look, that's an interesting discussion. Always interested to see how these newer projects continue to build out their ecosystem, especially when that ERC20 token has come into the economy, and how that now affects the whole broader ecosystem. So we'll obviously continue to monitor Memeland as we go forward. Kind of switching gears into the next piece of news for today. We had news that Foresight Ventures acquired a majority stake in the block. The block, you'll remember, was the kind of crypto media company that was heavily criticized and impacted by the FTX stuff, because there was someone, I can't remember the perfect story, but there was someone involved, I think potentially the CEO or someone very high up, who was like very much connected, maybe even paid off to some extent by the people at FTX. And there was just this very uncomfortable relationship between the company and the media. And the reason why I bring this up, I mean, just to give you some of the headline details. First, the crypto media outlet, The Block, was acquired for 70 million valuation by the Singapore-based Foresight Ventures. The 80% stake was worth 60 million and valued the news organization at 70. So it's a lot of money for this. And yeah, so the details were Mike McCaffrey, the former CEO, had held a majority stake, but he was removed from his position when it appeared that he'd taken millions of dollars in loans from Sam Bankman-Fried, the former CEO of collapsed crypto exchange. And obviously SBF is on his route probably to a guilty verdict in the US courts at the moment. But I guess the question that I wanted to pose to you, Legendary, and maybe I'll have some thoughts on this as well, and anyone else, is something that one of my friends, Tervo, said. Tervo's a really good writer, just more specializing in shit posting on the timeline at the moment, to be honest. But he's always entertaining and will say the things that sometimes people think, but won't take the time to say. He said media companies should not be owned by investment firms. And then the slightly spicier take: I don't know how anyone who works for a media company owned by an investment firm can delude themselves into believing they are capable of objective analysis. So very strong words there from my friend Turbo. And I just wanted to bring that to the table and think about to what extent you think that is fair, to what extent you think that is reasonable. What's your position, Legendary?
Ooh, I have a lot of thoughts on this one. So first of all, gonna get a bit Austrian with that one. I told you that real estate invested will all make sense in a second in Austria. Biggest real estate investor, René Benko, 23 billion portfolio, super complex holding company structure, more than 1,000 companies in total. And if you look at the Austrian news and media landscape, you will see that there is a daily newspaper, a very successful one called Kurier, which is owned 50.5% by one of the biggest banks in Austria and 49% by a holding, and that holding is owned by another holding, and that holding is owned by that real estate guy. And also it happens that the bank that owns the other half of that Kurier news company, newspaper company, happens to be the bank that is the biggest lender to that real estate guy. And that holding also owns a bunch of other media. So it's a super complex structure, which has been criticized so often over the last years in Austria, how basically, and that's not only that, it ended up that all media outlets have been bought up by holdings, by investment companies, or by the church. Like the Catholic Church still has major real estate in the news landscape, which is also, it's not an investment company, but is an influential entity that is buying influence by that proxy, in essence. In a similar vein, you could make that argument around Elon Musk buying X, like buying the town hall, the town square of where we come together. It is a difficult position. And I don't know, like, I definitely think for many newspapers, that statement is true, that it's super difficult to have an objective analysis if you're owned by an investment company that can dictate certain things about how to run the company. On the other hand, you have things, I think it is the Washington Post that was bought by Jeff Bezos a couple of years ago, that otherwise would have defaulted, and then they wouldn't have any other capability of conducting any kind of analysis. So is it sometimes a question of what's the lesser evil? I don't know, but
Mm.
it's definitely a very, very complex topic to approach, especially that in this digital age, traditional media companies, other than advertising, like lack a sustainable business model and
Yeah.
often are not even able to survive without either public subsidies or investment companies. And then the question to me becomes, is it the responsibility of a government to subsidize that news and media landscape? And if you say yes to that, then isn't it simply the case that the government takes the role of the investment company and then becomes basically the entity that influences those media outlets depending on who's currently governing that specific country? So it's
Yeah.
not a trivial thing to answer.
Yeah, very complicated. You said a lot of things there, which I'd kind of wanted to pick out. I don't know if I'll get to all of them, but you mentioned at some point the lesser of evils. And actually, to be fair to Turbo, I didn't read his comment to his initial tweet. He said there aren't many better options though, for what it's worth. So, you know, on the one hand, you can criticize and you can look at a media company and say, well, how can you think that you are objective if you are bought by a particular set of investors whose priorities you are probably on the balance of probabilities going to have to look after? And at the same time, as you say, like, what's the alternative? This is something I've thought about a lot. I used to be a media lawyer as well, and it's just very, very interesting. I do think at a minimum, I mean, you mentioned one publication where you are, where it's just very hard to find the person who is the ultimate owner. And I think I don't know if that's on a purely company structure or whether that's actually a public difficulty to find out who owns something. I think that is a more easy solution, where I do think that everyone who's consuming media, it should be very easy to know who owns the media. And I guess that point manifests itself in our space in the way that, you know, particular creators, because, you know, I think we are becoming, if we are not there already, we're on the road to becoming media companies ourselves, whether it's by establishing a literal media company like the Modern Market, or just the legendary media company / the B-Check media company, more on an individual level. We are creating stuff very routinely. And so I think at a minimum, people should know who's paying the bills, basically. I think people should know who is paying the bills, and that shouldn't be difficult to determine, whether that's via, you know, a post every single time that you post something for something. I think that's actually a bit overboard, because I don't see other types of advertisers. I've given this example before, like in the James Bond movie, you don't have a sign that comes up from Aston Martin saying, by the way, this is an advert, when you see James Bond driving in this car, and when he's drinking the Coke or the Heineken, oh, by the way, that's a product placement. Like, you don't have to do that. So I actually think you know, internet creators get hit probably a bit harder than they should, given how other people are expected to comply and be forthright and upfront. But having said that, I do think it should not be complicated for people to find out, you know, if you are an advisor to projects, how do we know that? Like, how do we know how B-Check is surviving full time? And I think I've been pretty transparent about it. I don't say it on the timeline every single day, obviously, but I think that is something, the transparency element is important, because then people can at least know, right, you know, I get all this useful news, but I know that BJ like really likes NFT lending, and so he's probably going to say good stuff about NFT lending, right? I mean, of course, there are risks as well. There's smart contract risk. There's all kinds of other risks involved when the floor price goes down beneath the value of the loan that you've given. Like, those things are very real. So those are my thoughts. Transparency key, but a bunch of other interesting things you mentioned too.
Yeah, because you mentioned actually the very important point of movies and product placement in movies, it's something that I thought about, why this is the case. Why, if you look at a Hollywood movie, you will never see that advertising being disclosed, whether, as you said, it's James Bond driving an Aston Martin, someone having an iPhone. It's because just as FCC rules don't apply to movies. And there's no FTC requirement to have that disclosed to movies either. So it's just not the case that you would have to disclose that. The rules that apply for TV, radio from the FTC are a different set of rules. And again, FCC doesn't encompass movies.
This show is a movie, Legendary. What
This
about
show is a
that?
movie. This show is a movie, right? I love it.
This is a daily movie that we shoot every single day.
Yeah, it's a live movie.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cool.
I like the thinking. My brain stopped working at that conclusion, but I like it.
That's the solution to the problem. Jack, your hand is raised. What's your thought on this issue of buying media and the influence that it buys you?
Yeah, for me, it's like there's just not much money in it, is there? Like honestly, like there's like traditional media.
Well, traditional media for sure is broke.
Yeah,
I think it's completely fine as an internet creator.
Yeah, as a creator, yeah, like individually, but in terms of like, you know, like traditional media, news outlets, even digital news outlets, I think are like generally struggling without some sort of financial backing. It's almost like a semi-charity work at this point, like actually informing the public. And the thing that I always fall upon, especially now, is like AI is like basically just scraping this information now. So you don't even have to go to the websites, the sources that actually generate the revenue. And I just don't know what that is going to do, because I think if you want fair and reasonable media, they have to be able to monetize in some way themselves. Otherwise, this is just going to get a bigger and bigger problem. And as AI means that they don't even fund the sites that they're getting the information from in any way, shape, or form, it's going to be really unusual as we're looking for information through AI, but they start losing the sources of that information because they've been scraping data and scraping information without paying those people who are providing that information and research. So I do think it will get like much more individual sort of searches and like basically brand names again, and you've got to build your brand around being a person who actually tells the news neutrally.
Yeah,
I just don't see too much of that now. I feel like it's one side or the other. So it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years for sure.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think you're correct in saying that the traditional media model is basically broken. The overheads of running an establishment as large as they get, I think, becomes very, very difficult to maintain. And that's why the door's so wide open for more niche segments or sectors for people to establish themselves as the one person. Like, you don't even need a bunch of people. I mean, we've got NFT Stats in the audience, who's one of the key sources of information for the NFT market. Like, would you really go anywhere else would you really go to Cointelegraph to figure out what's going on? And this isn't there's not disparaging about those traditional publications. It's just that there are certain people on the timeline, like NFT Stats, Tyler, who are, like, we just do it better. We do it better than those people. We're closer to it on a live basis. No, we don't do everything perfectly all the time, but you kind of get that live feedback. And so if there is anything wrong, that stuff gets corrected quite quickly at the same time. So I just struggle to see a world where those traditional people can compete when there are people on the ground. And yeah, but the only thing I'd finally say, Jack, I think you make a very good point, that there isn't this kind of utopia where, oh, everyone becomes a citizen journalist and everyone can produce really interesting, fair, reasonable content all the time, because then you do run into this thing of bias. Like, people might start a particular way. What are the standards for an individual creator? They're not held to any particular standards. I'm sure people are doing it with the best intentions at the start. But you know, the standards exist for a reason. So I think there's a danger of thinking that the only place that you'll get news from in the future is purely citizen journalists who, you know, may be doing their best, but may not have a fuller picture because they're just one person. So there are benefits to the economies of scale of a bigger organization as well. Really interesting discussion, really interesting thoughts. Kusho, your hand is raised. We're running out of time for today's show, so give us your quick thought on this issue of media companies and influence and who owns them.
As someone who uses Cointelegraph to put together my midweek catch up, I feel heat. I feel like I'm target of some kind of scrutiny. But yeah,
You should be reading us only,
I
Kusho.
agree.
That's it. I'm joking.
But
I'm
yeah, I
joking.
agree because there's this media company in Nigeria that was previously owned by the current president. He owned the company, and during the whole election period, we saw that many of the things that they put out were in favor of him as opposed to against. But he is the money bag. Much of the money is coming from him. People are getting fed from him. People get access to opportunities to do documentaries for other state establishments all through him. So it's the kind of thing where if you're going to build a media company, you kind of need to figure out how you want to kind of generate enough revenue. One way to do that would be sponsorships. Another way would be to do documentaries on behalf of other people, which is something that I see a lot of YouTube documentary channels kind of doing, which might be interesting and be a very good way to kind of fund their operations going forward. But the general issue is my general summary is everyone has a bias, every reporter, every media company, and the deeper you go in terms of funding, the much larger that bias becomes.
Fair. I think that's a very fair thought. Legendary, do you want to tie this up maybe in relation to what Kusho said about how, alternative ways of funding? Think about yourself as a creator. You've got certain deals, which are, well, I'm not sure if you do, but when I think about it from my perspective, there's like certain deals that are like pure sponsorship. But then, as you say, sometimes that might not be enough, but you've managed to secure kind of external deals where we might contract out for certain services. How have you thought about that as a way to diversify your portfolio of also your different streams of income?
I think that kind of diversification is very important because what you can't end up doing is ultimately selling your brand, selling your voice exclusively to someone else, and in that process, killing any semblance of objectivity that you might have. So that diversification is super important. And I think also maybe as a concluding thought on that, topic of objective media and objectivity, it is an utopia to some extent. We are, at the end of the day, all humans. We all have preconceived notions. We all are biased. Yes, we can uphold ourselves to high standards, or journalists can uphold themselves to high standards, but there will still be a bias in that. AI will still be biased because it's trained on human created material that ultimately is biased too. Even our show is biased. I like to talk about gaming because I care about gaming. You like art, you talk more about art. So there is a certain bias in there, and we are both, very excited for the future of Web3. This is why we're talking about Web3 and not Web2. So it's basically shaped by our interests, which certainly has and I see you shaking your head, a certain bias tied to it. So the reality is that true objective journalism just simply can't exist when it's created by humans.
I don't know. Maybe you're speaking for yourself there, Legendary. I'm just coming with a pure lens of objectivity and responsible journalism, framed by all of the frameworks from all of my years in media litigation. Guys, it's been, I mean, I'm joking. Many of the things which Legendary said is completely fair. It's been a great discussion, guys. We have unfortunately run out of time for today's show. We will be back again tomorrow. We hope you enjoyed. Have a lovely day. Take care, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.